there are no matches being held. This is the only thing I've got to write. And it's just puddles. So I took pictures of puddles, and I said, I've got nothing. All I've got to write about is like how these guys pass time for 8 hours at tennis tournaments that they cannot play in. So I asked him, said, what do you think I should do? He said, well, can you sit down and type? I said, yeah. He said, can you type something that fills space? I said, yeah. He said, do it. So I said, well, what that did was it kind of took the stigma out of the idea of having to write this Pulitzer Prize winner, winning column every day. And the other thing that helps with that is that that it's kind of like baseball. There's always the next inning. If you look at any project, I think, as being the be-all, end-all project, that this will be my manifesto, my magnum opus, you will just get stuck. I mean, you will look at every single word and go, is that the right word? It has to be the right word, and so on. And you come out writing better and more fluidly and more naturally in your own voice if you're not laboring over every syllable like that. So those are two of the things that kind of got me pointed into writing this in an essay format. And I knew of all these stories that I had from my youth, and that were a lot of folks, would resound and echo in a lot of people's lives, these memories. But I also was grieving my father's death and his 5 years of dementia. So it just so happened, really, I never really intended to make this a grieving process or a transcendent process. It was something that I looked at. I took a dictaphone. Stephen King says, never take a dictaphone or a writer's notebook, because he said if it's worth remembering, you'll remember it. He said that'll be the distillation process. You do not need to sit here and write everything down on the notebook, because I'll forget. If it's good, you'll remember it. Well, that's great for Stephen King, but I'm 60 something, so I don't remember everything like that. So I kept a writer's notebook. I literally had a video camera on facing towards me in the driver's seat on Velcro. The Velcro's still there, the video camera's not. So I used those as cues, and I came up with a lot of other ideas to create this, I guess what I call a kind of a photo album, and I'll get to that in a minute. So I look to my folks and these rides that we used to take, and how we used to commute basically between New England and North Carolina, Chapel Hill as it were. And I looked at these as moments in time, snapshots, and I wanted to describe them almost like photo albums. I don't know if anybody remembers what photo albums are. They're actually these books that you put photos in, and you open the pages, and you can show your college roommate that, oh, here's my hometown and so on like that. They're actually like hard copy photos. They're not on your phone. But I tried to create a lot of these kind of picturesque pieces of mini poetry or just vignettes. I love the classic American authors. I particularly love the essayists, like Dave, the newspaper essayists like Irma Bombeck and Dave Barry and Bill Bryson now. But we also love the sound of our parents' laughter, and I think it's formative. I think that we're most comforted by the echoes of the ringing laughter of our parents. I can't remember what my mother served us this particular day or this Christmas dinner or something like that, but I can remember her laughing at Carol Burnett. And I can remember them taking the Irma Bombeck column out of the paper and clipping it and taking it on Sunday afternoon rides. And we would read and just laugh like crazy in the backseat, even though if we didn't know, we were just laughing, I think, because our parents were laughing. And that's what made it memorable. So they've always been a good litmus paper test on what is a good story or what is memorable. It's the same way that my own children, the one here, will remember the fact that they probably won't remember anything about our trip to Utah, except for the fact that my mom, their mom went into an absolute hysterical laughing fit driving towards Kanab, Utah, because she could not figure out the pronunciation of it, and she lost it, and she about drove off the road. But our daughter will remember that, because we love it when we see our parents enjoying themselves. We see our parents laughing. As I said, this is never intended for therapy. It was just trying to portray this through the language of intimate moments. And I did want to kind of break into a quick example of this thing. So this is a one reading that I wanted to choose, and that kind of illustrated that. And if you've read this, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, but I definitely wanted to kind of use this as an illustrative example. And this is, I believe, it's from my trip down Route 310, that I kind of got altered onto, as opposed to I-95, because there was an accident and I had a fuss with GPS. But GPS won, but they sent me down 310, and I found it very interesting. It's in the chapter called I-95 South, I think, through Virginia. So here's an example of just trying to paint vignettes and paint pictures. There are few places in the world where time noticeably stands still. During a visit 7 years ago, my son Harrison and I visited Winston Churchill's bunker beneath the Treasury building in the Whitehall area of London. A family visit there. Here, the small gray rooms where plans to save the world were laid out now played host to Eastern Europeans and Americans in Hawaiian shirts who had already been to Buckingham Palace and Abbey Road. All maps in the facility showed Allied troop locations in Europe as of the war's end. A calendar on one wall still showed the date as August 16th, 1945, the day after the surrender of Japan, forever making the last day that room was used strategically. In the same room where the First World War II cabinet was held, clocks reflected in perpetuity the start of that meeting, 4:59, August 15th, 1940. Clock hands stood eerily still. Such was Route 310 South. For the first time in 9 days, I was a stranger on a strange road, forsaking smooth asphalt for worn, scarred concrete. I was on the alternate route, one I had not mapped out, leading through towns and countryside locked in time. There were strip malls and food chains and Jiffy Lubes in small towns, to be sure, but between them were old churches and homes pressed in against the road's sandy shoulders. Crossroads bore old family names, and private driveways led right out into traffic. Stacked on cinder blocks, rusted fins on old Chevys rose above the weeds and stalked the tall grasses around trailers and bungalows like sharks. Mud puddles filled with spring showers still dotted the gravel driveways to live bait shops and flea markets. At the same time, gas was cheap, lights were green, traffic was light. The scent wafting from fields of wildflowers were verdant, thick, and sweet. Banners waved proudly on Little League backstops behind empty diamonds. American flags decorated porches where local gentry sipped iced tea with lemon and mint leaves and waved or tipped the John Deere ball cap from their porch swings or rocking chairs. This wasn't Buena Vista, Virginia, like on my first day of travel. That town just lingered behind the other towns by decades. No, along this route, time simply stood still. Towns here appeared as if they'd stopped evolving the very minute 995 was completed, reflecting the more practical option, the fastest route. Again, I was looking through a pane of glass at a museum diorama like I had at the Smithsonian. I-95, like modern highways, had struck like a comet, and only the prehistoric bones of these old towns were left to tell the tale of another era, both rustic and glorious, survival of the fittest. So you can see how there are a number of snapshots to this family album, or this photo album. That's what I tried to convey, and I'll only do one more reading at some point here real quick. But I also want to thank Mitch Simpson, who's this very progressive, retired now minister at the University Baptist Church, where my parents were wed, and also where I gave my father's eulogy, and he commanded me and gave me that charge to write. But he said, and I'm paraphrasing this, but after my father's funeral, he said, "Do not indict yourself for your frustration, desperation, or any feeling you may have as a caregiver." And at this point in time, I had been 5 years into taking care of both of my parents that had dementia. Do not indict yourself for frustration, desperation, or any feeling you may have as a caregiver. Your self-condemnation is not admissible in court. There is no emotion that's inappropriate. So when you're dealing with this kind of grief or the kind of day-to-day humdrum and caregiver, you have to watch for caregiver stress, but you will have crazy thoughts that enter your head, dark thoughts and so on. And those things, when they pass through your head, you can't control that. You can control how you deal with them. And he said, just don't beat yourself up on it. And that was it. I also wanted to talk really briefly and tell you one of the stories that is not in the book about my father. My father was, he was UNC, class of 1952, and met my mother at Kessing Pool. And he was, prior to that, he was in the Marines. And but he had never been out of Pennsylvania really until he went to basic at Parris Island. He was fairly naive. He had not grown into his body. He was still slight, not very physical and so on. Really, probably due to malnourishment. You know, when he'd been raised to this Depression era Pennsylvania towns, mid towns in limestone and coal mine country. So when he got transferred out, or he was offered a position to go work on these new jet engines up at Morehead City, Cherry Point, and get out of basic training a week early, he said, yes. Like they say in Ghostbusters, they say if they ask you if you're a god, you say yes. So if they ask you want to skip basic trainings last week and get out from under your drill instructor, you say yes. So he did, and he went to Cherry Point, and the first time he got a weekend leave pass, he went to Atlantic Beach, and he laid out because he had been to Parris Island, he had been now to Morehead City, but other than that, he had only been to Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. So at that point, he went out and laid on the beach for, 8 hours. When he got back to base, they declared him unfit for duty. And they said that they caved with that, and they never pressed formal charges or had a formal reprimand because they just chalked it up to being absolutely dumb and naive. So he got out of that, and I've been getting out of that being dumb and naive myself. So. I also so that's one story I wanted to and I want to leave you here with and then open it up for questions. I just want to leave you with just another quick thing and a couple of tips. So this is more kind of like a resolve here. It's a very short reading talking about medicine, travel being medicine, and this is in the epilogue. I still prescribe travel like medicine. It's a salve for myself and anyone else who might share the view. It continues to feed me, restore me, educate me, amaze me, and enrich me. And when I'm lost to this world, look for me somewhere on the open road. That's where I rediscovered my father. That's where I'll be found. My children are grown now and traveling the world for themselves. It's a rare and cherished occasion that I see both of them in my rearview mirror now. Having driven thousands of miles in dozens of countries, they're still spinning the globe, dropping a finger, setting a course, and cultivating memories. Someday, they may even be fortunate enough to see young, impressionable passengers in their own rearview mirrors as they all gaze out together at the universe with the stars above flying among them, or flying along with them, excuse me. So here are my tips for road trips. And by the way, I have a lot of little quotes at the beginning of every chapter, and I did not want to ask, spend months trying to solicit permissions for the quotes. So I just used ones that were 75 years old. And so when you look at these things, you'll notice that it's kind of ironic that I'm writing a book about road trips and using quotes that are highlighting, that season these stories. With when people were driving, Model Ts. So if that, cars were not ubiquitous. So first of all, use GPS study maps. Secondly, rent a great car. You never know when you're going to be renting this great car. We rented a car to go to LA and San Francisco, and we rented a BMW, and I got to tell you, I would not have driven down Rodeo Drive in LA with anything less. So if you can afford it for 1 week, might as well get a car that's, you know, that you would never get otherwise, just so you can drive that Corvette or that '63 Mustang. Wipe the windshield. Inevitably, your children, you or whoever, are going to see something out the window. It's the Gaffney peach or something like that, and you got to take a picture of that. And you take a picture of that, and you grab the phone. And everybody get a picture of that as it goes by at 70 miles an hour. The only problem with that is if the windows aren't clean. So my wife and my honeymoon videos that we took, a lot of driving through Colorado and through the Rocky Mountains. Unfortunately, we hadn't cleaned the windows before we, got into this rent-a-car and started taking pictures of all these things. And apparently somewhere around Nashville, Tennessee, a bird left his comment on our windshield. And so now 4 or 5 hours of our honeymoon video is mired by that watermark that is the bird poop on the window that is like there with us at all times. So wipe your windshield, allow downtime. After the trip, my wife is going, yeah. So when you make a long trip or a road trip, make sure that you get at least a day in where you're just kind of recuperating and just getting mental health back. Also recognize and appreciate grace, because you will never find more grace that I have found than you would find on the road and when you're in need. We lost our wallet, left it on the top of a car at I guess a mobile bookmobile area at a rest stop in Boulder, Colorado. It would have ruined our honeymoon, and somebody found that wallet and kept it for us and finally got it back to us, saving our honeymoon. We were in a hurricane in Florida, and people reached out to us and allowed us places to stay. We've lost things, left things behind, and people have always been there to reunite us. So if you are, and it's very easy to be, fairly sour about the world and the condition of the world today. But if you kind of cast your prejudices aside, not look at people the way they look and not versus the way they are, and so on, I think you'll find there's a baseline level of grace that still exists out there on the road. And with that, I would just say, once again, I wanted to say thank you. I want to thank Alex. I am going to be at the Seymour Center talking about in early December, I think either the first Tuesday or Thursday in the afternoon, talking talking about writing memoirs, because this is tantamount to a memoir, but I can talk about getting some creative ideas and prompts that way. So I'll be speaking there. If you're interested in my blog, I have business cards in the back table. You can use that query code and go to my website, and I post blogs about every 3 weeks. If you're not on the mailing list and want to be, just write down right on that back table right there next to the road snacks. I've got cheddar cheese nabs and spearmint gum and juicy fruit, and Macintosh apples. If you can digest that without feeling car sick, go back there, pick whatever will satiate you, and jot your name and email address down. Also, I am, and for those interested, I am entertaining the idea and kind of, like I said, fermenting and kind of distilling these thoughts of writing something that is a series of essays now for my next project that is called A Memory of Cold. Just kind of a working title, and it's usually kind of like the romance around cold that used to be back when we had cold. So, in about 100 years, 150 years, this may be, I hope it's not the last will and testament for our winters. But I mean, if you look at it right now, I mean, the winters, just the pandemic itself have changed winters. I mean, are there snow days anymore? To be honest, I mean, are they just zooming from the glass? With that, I just wanted to say thank you once again. Thank you for reading. Thank you for the reading you're going to do if you haven't read it, and just open it up to any questions. And I'll be around there signing books too, if anybody has any other questions as well. Thanks so much for coming out, guys. So, any questions? Don't make me ask you questions.
I have a question, Randy.
Sure, absolutely.
I really liked the excerpt that you read that you were describing that road, and there was a ton of imagery, right? Like you remember the scent of the air and what people look like as they're tipping their hat to you. Is all that stuff, like, do you realize in those moments that you're remembering that? Or when you're thinking back to those most memorable details, you're thinking, oh yeah, that's what it smelled like, and I'm remembering that now.
It sometimes takes another ride. Sometimes I'll ride to Burlington or just get out in the dark, because in the dark, every place looks like wherever you're thinking about, right? I mean, it looks like Southern Virginia in the dark. And it looks like a coastal road, Route 1A, if it's dark. But so I'll sometimes just go out for the mental health fit and just cruise down the highway and hear that rush of roar, that roar of wind in my ears and so on like that, and those things will come back hauntingly. Sometimes I need prompts, like a writer's notebook. And all deference to Mr. King, but in any case, there are certain things that are, I guess one would say it once again, not to overuse the word, but distilled from a lot of different trips that I've taken. There's a song called "I Am a Town." I think it's Mary Chapin Carpenter, and she's very much like that. And she just talks about these. She calls it puddles that don't dry for 8 months. These red clay puddles and so on. So, but anyway, I also want to thank the publisher, Bob Kern. He's in Carborough, so he's a Technical Publishing Inc. And also my editor Lee Lassiter, who worked on these things and kind of helped me fine tune a lot of the words, and actually was one of my biggest early advocates, and it meant an awful lot. So I'm not sure if she's still doing editing right now, but if she is, and you get a chance to work with her, you're lucky. So
I have a question for you. As a young man, say maybe around 11,
yeah.
Did you ever think you look back and enjoy car rides with your parents?
We enjoyed the car rides kind of like a dog and puppy enjoys car rides. So we enjoyed car rides because there was something that we knew that our father would use to placate us. It was either a trip to the general store, or it was going out when he would get tired of listening to this buzz in his ears, and he just this vitriol and squabbling of a square inch of territory between my brother and I in the back seat. He would say, it's about time to get out and run it off through a field of open grass somewhere. Or he'd find a backstop or a tennis court or this. And he had a bag in the back that had implements of every sports destruction that you could find. He would just be like a magician. He would reach into that bag and like a magician pulling a rabbit out of his hat, he would poof, catcher's mitt. Like poof, tennis racket, abracadabra, ice skates, like that. So we were sitting and driving through the hills of Western Massachusetts and the Berkshires, or around here to the beach, to Wilmington or something like that. And we, if we started to get unruly, he would just either say like, oh, well, here's a basketball court, or here's a tennis court, or here's whatever. And then we would just be like this in the back seat until we got to McDonald's sometime that evening. And at that point, we were comatose. We would just sleep in the back seat until a few series of turns would wake us up, because they were so familiar. We could just look out the windows and be laying on the back seat and go, that's the maple tree at the end of the block. We got another 30 seconds for it to sleep. And then, we would pull into that driveway, and then the whole adventure would be over. But I mean, the beginning of the road trips, it was kind of like, when are we going to do this? When are we going to do that? And we would just let my father hear it. And then, but, as I said, in this one closing, it's I can only hope that our children at some point in time, through their hovering cars or hover whatever like that, will have the chance to look back and ask the same questions of their kids, when they're 10 and 11. So I would say, yeah, Janet.
Can you tell me how you came up with the title?
I want to say it's like Paul McCartney, where he came into him, in a dream, and he wrote Eleanor Rigby and like that. I would like to say that, but it didn't come from a dream, but it came from somewhere I can't put my finger on. what the title means is that we would sleep in the back of cars. So those folks who haven't read it, there's a section where I talk about the fact that when we had overnight trips on I-95 to Chapel Hill or back up to New England, we would almost always lay this pallet out in the back and fold these Dodge Dart seats down, and they would prepare. We would get in our jammies and all these kind of things. We'd eat something at a rest stop or a McDonald's cheeseburger or whatever like that, and then we would lay back. And of course, we could sleep, but we would lay back with our head in the back window. And when we switched to the Dodge, from the Dodge Dart to the Cornet Custom, it had this window that kind of sloped in. You know, this was a miraculous car, and the back door could open this way or down or whatever. But the back window sloped in. So whenever we would try and stay awake in the back of the car, right above those tire wells with that drone, and I don't know why noisemakers don't include like car on the highway, because I would just fall asleep. Boom. I think it's called brown noise, by the way. I just wrote a blog about it. But and my brother and I would just sit there and you know, just entertain ridiculous thoughts and draw crazy pictures in the frost on the windows and so on. But once we finally kind of relegated ourselves to falling asleep, I think, and I won't read this whole thing. I'll just read you just the one little outro paragraph that was kind of indicative of how we looked at this thing and woke up through the night. So anyway, we're sleeping here in the back of the car for about 6 to 8 hours, and dawn was undeniable when it finally came. And I'll finish with this, by the way. Light poured in from every window, and my brother and I would resist it until we finally stirred and groggily begged for breakfast. But through the deep of the night, everywhere was inky blackness, where distant front porch lights or small town street lights would occasionally streak by like shooting stars. The glow of distant cities would cast silos and steeples into ghostly silhouettes. But above us, through the glass and into that depth of night, stars hung motionless out in all that cold. A single mile or a few thousand would not change our perspective on the universe. But for a few moments on the dreamy edge of sleep, there was a sense that the stars were along for the ride. We knew we could not outrun them if we wanted to. They flew with us as surely as if they knew the way. For all of our speed, the constellations would not come unhinged. All was right in the heavens, and we fell asleep, bundled up warm and safe in that confidence. So with that, I will set Alex free, and thank you guys, and I'll be back in the back table in case anybody wants to purchase a couple of Christmas gifts for their friends or someone. Yeah, oh yeah, sure.
Sounds like a lot of treasured memories with trips and vacations in the past. Any future trips that you have in your mind as what your next adventure will be?
my wife is trying to prod me into writing more of a sequel than launching into something else. When I started this whole process, it was about all of the wonderful, the grace and the lucky. We always seem to run into a natural disaster somewhere on our trip with our kids, and we started doing trips with the kids when they were kind of like of the age that they were manageable, when my son was 4 and she was 6 or 7. But there's very little of that here. There's a kind of a hopeful outcome that they have this wanderlust now, that we've instilled that wanderlust in them, and that they can go out and move about the world themselves and so on, and kind of experience these things too. But I don't really launch into that here. It's primarily what I experienced in this one trip. The framing story of this is this one trip. If I were to look, and I would not have to look hard, this whole thing started from about 30 or 40 stories, which about 30 of them, or 3/4 of them, were with our kids, 2 by 2. My wife and I in the front seat, and my daughter and son in the back seat, and that just felt as if I mentioned, very much like putting on a good fitting pair of jeans, just 2 by 2 in the front and back seat. So if I were, it would be very easy to come up with stories that just involved our own road trips as opposed to the ones that I went on. So I think that's lurking out there somewhere. If I find that is nagging at me, more so than the other one. I'll venture into that. So, but thanks for asking, and thank you for all these questions.
For what it's worth, I think like wanderlust is a relative term because a lot of people might not identify with this, but now I want to go out and chase all those hurricanes.
Oh yeah.
That you like, so that's what I've gathered from our experiences, and I think that those are good memories.
Well, we
hindsight.
unfortunately we found them when we chased them. So yeah, because we got locked in the. We went to Disney World and it was great, all the rides and so on like that, but we got stuck there for Hurricane Charlie and that was way better.
Better being relative.
Yeah, we got caught in the blackout down Western Connecticut but the good news was all the toll booth arms were raised on the entire New Jersey Turnpike, which as we find out in the book is a good thing, right? So I don't owe Victor Rufo $17.60 from the state of New Jersey, which is something nobody ever wants to hear.
Dad, I have a question. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know you were going to close that.
No, I've lost the thought. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I didn't know if you were going to finish up. I was just curious. So, all of these places, because we've gone on a lot of these trips with you, and then you went on a solo trip, kind of back up and around after.
Yes, way better. Way better. And dragging these kids around all the time.
To what extent, obviously, so you have a photographic memory and you hold on to a lot of those, the little nuances and stuff, from our trips, and I'm sure the same applies as is, that we can gather from having read the book, that you're able to hold on to a lot of that from those earlier trips too, but all of those places, or most if not all of those places, you have retraced those steps or lived for long periods. So to what extent do you think that there are some, I guess, reflections of your current, I guess, perception of these places? So for example, Chapel Hill, you'll talk about a road trip you took to Chapel Hill. Do you think that, to what extent is that original vision of Chapel Hill when you were a kid something you're able to retain and kind of regurgitate for the purposes of the book versus?
It's a great question. It's hard to say because there's so much of Chapel Hill that's changed. So very often I will go like, that's where the scuttlebutt used to be, or here's where Chinese 3.5 used to be, or here's where all of these things, which I imagine was the same as my parents. My mother graduated from Chapel Hill High School in 1949, and I imagine she spent the next 30 years going like, well, that Granville Towers, that's where my high school used to be. So there are certain aspects that are new, or certain aspects that are better, and there are certain aspects that I can still see, right? Like it's just still there. I think certain central areas of campus and certain areas in Chapel Hill that's kind of retained that quaintness, I guess. But I think Chapel Hill, it was probably the student body and about 10 or 20 other thousand, residents, professors and so on like that now. And now, if the road construction is any indication, I'd say we're heading for 100,000. So, we're already at 60 some thousand. So, there's a lot of growth. Just hopefully they're keeping it tempered and so on like that. I just know that it's at least an hour and a half on the road between the University Mall and Carborough now. So, but it's not so much like the destinations that I remember. What I remember is that sense of bliss and well-being heading to those destinations. Not even so much heading back, but my father would always find something to take that 14-hour trip back from our vacation and make it remarkable. We would stop at the Smithsonian. We would pop out to Ocean City, Maryland, or we would do that, just take an extra day. My father was great at knowing that it would go an awful long way towards his mental health and our mental health if he just inserted this event, which would probably be all the more memorable in our trip, so that it was more than just a trip. There's always something to look forward to. And he would always say, here's where that happened, here's where that happened, here's where Johnny Unitas plays, etc. So it was always as much the adventure to this day, as much the adventure getting there as it is arriving. So, any other questions? So I'll be around. If you have any, please find me, flag me down. Thanks so much for coming, guys. Really meant it well. Bumbo, here we go.
Lex just told me about that in the car over here.
The one going was always really fun, and the one coming home.
Bum, 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 here we
so
come.
monotone.